All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Environment Subcommittee. So we have two bills on the list for discussion only. We won't take any action, but the second item is wrapping up the discussion of the climate bill, talking about the building section, related sections. And the first item is to review House Bill 1207, which is Delegate Bridges' bill to reform the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities, of which Delegate Boyce is the legislature's member. And so there are Delegate Bridges, Delegate Boyce and I have worked on amendments. I know Delegate Bridges has submitted to them the amendment requests. We don't have them back yet. So at our next meeting, we'll review those amendments. But if in the meantime, we can review what the bill does in its current form and invite discussion. So with that, if folks could turn to House 1207. And what I'd like to do, Kristen, I'd like to ask you to walk through the bill. And then Delegate Boyce, again, since you are the commissioner on our committee, if you could give us your feedback. And then I'll ask one or two of the advocates if they wanted to, provide feedback as well, and then we'll take questions. That sound like a plan? Okay. Well, great. Kristen, if you could go through House Bill 1207 in its original form, that would be great.
Okay, I will do. Good afternoon. So House Bill 1207 makes several changes to the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities. The bill expands the membership of the commission and alters the appointment process for commission members. Currently, there are a list of members that are appointed by the governor. This bill would also add members that are appointed by the presiding officers. Do you want me to go through the members? Do you want me just to kind of generally talk about,
Yeah, you could just generally talk about them.
Okay, we can always go back if there's a question. The bill also requires that to the extent practicable, the membership of the commission must reflect the racial, gender, ethnic, and geographic diversity of the state. With respect to the chair of the commission, under current law, the governor selects the chair. The bill would have the chair be elected from the members of the commission. The bill also requires that the Department of the Environment provide new commission members with orientation that reviews environmental justice issues in the state and the previous work of the commission. With respect to commission meetings, currently the commission must meet at the times and places that the chairman determines. The bill would change the meeting times to be at least 6 times per calendar year. At least one of the meetings must be held in a rural location of the state, and at least one must be held in an urban location of the state. The bill also, this is now on page 5, alters and expands the duties of the commission. And I don't know if you want me to go over that or just the general overview. And that's it for what I have.
Yeah, I guess it's important to mention that page 5, line 6, it says use data sets and mapping tools to review and analyze the impact of current state laws, et cetera.
Yeah.
And in line 15 says that about after seeking input from communities impacted by environmental justice issues, create a list of potential supplemental environmental projects to address environmental justice issues. And I guess the only other item I wanted to note was in terms of the new members, well, the membership is increased, as Kristen noted, is expanded. And in particular, it adds 3 additional representatives from communities who are that are impacted by environmental justice issues. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, that how does it change the dynamics of the committee? I mean, how many members did we add and how many were there before?
yeah, well, actually, maybe that's a good segue. Delegate Boyce, maybe could I turn things over to you to explain sort of the, the makeup of the commission and how this would change?
Yeah, I'm actually looking for that specific document. I didn't, I thought I had it in one email versus the other. So I'm sorry, give me one quick second.
That's
Sure.
fine. But it substantially changed the dynamics of the committee or?
Sorry, it does increase.
Or?
Yeah, in terms of the size of the committee, of the commission, it does increase it to a total of 20 members. Looks like
20, currently the commission has 20 members, and then what and I think 12 of which are appointed by the governor, and then the bill adds members that would be appointed by the presiding officers, which are similar in makeup of what's being appointed by the governor, but that does increase the membership where there might be, a few more members from local government and members representing communities impacted by environmental justice.
Okay, that dynamic is what my concern is, and Kristen, you've comforted my concerns a lot with how you design.
yeah, and also, I mean, it does specify at least the commission tell me at least 6 times per year. And a couple other things in terms of sort of the processes of the commission.
I have the document now, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So,
Great.
thank you. So so I've been to one meeting, as I joke, and but through that meeting and then just getting emails, I realized more often than not there may be some confusion about, or thoughts, I shouldn't say confusion, about what the commission does versus what it quote unquote should do. And so we received per Delegate Bridges some amendments submitted by an advocate, and we went through them. And so to Delegate Otto's question about and the representatives from communities impacted by environmental justice issues, it says at least 3, meaning that if we wanted to add a couple more, it could be 5, it could be 6. So at least we thought was because it said at least 4, but at least 3 means there could be 4 or 5 or 6, and so it just sets a minimum. The next was I believe it's page 3, line 28, that essentially it says, yes, page 3, line 28. To the extent practical, the membership of the commission shall reflect the racial, gender, ethnic, and geographical diversity of the state. And it says, according to the most recent census data, and then it should say, as it relates to the meetings on page 4, line 18, to draft language rather than saying in a rural or in a urban area, because there could be also suburban areas. It said that it had to be drafted to create rotating meeting locations, because the concern was that meetings were often held in the same place and not necessarily representative around the state. So I think bill drafting is going to work on that particular language. Page 5, line 6 discussed the use of data sets and mapping tools. And it said in coordination with the University of Maryland Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health Lab. We struck that and decided that it should be added under membership as a body of knowledge that the commission could call upon to in coordination use some of this data, and so that it would removed, and it also removed the word the impact of current state and local, but state would mean local, so it doesn't, I think local was not needed, but kept permits, actions, and policies on the issues of the environmental and sustainable communities, including, it said including cumulative impact effects and exposure. That particular, I believe, section may have been removed. Looks
So
like
we
something's-
had those amendments for that, removing those things, or just
so the
still
sponsor,
working off the original bill?
yes, sir. So what
Original
happened
bill.
was, an advocate sent Delegate Bridges a table of different lines at different sections of the bill to work with or clean up. So I don't know what happened with bill drafting just yet, but those amendments were submitted. So,
Well, Delegate Boyce, you reassured me a lot of my questions of define the underserved communities, I hope, in some fashion. Certainly
yes.
in one of them, and that I represent. And also talking about what was rural and who was in it and where those meetings were going to be. That were really a lot of my questions I had in it.
Oh, well, that's good. I think we thought it was fair
I think you've struck on a lot of chords that I'm concerned about, and hopefully we'll see something out of it.
Well, I guess I guess I should have started off by saying is that a lot of what I understand advocates are seeking versus what the actual commission does is different and somewhat comes into conflict. And so this is a body, from what I understand, being a part of it, that is supposed to help influence and lead the discussions and changes for the different departments, not to be the change for the departments. And so some of the work that's being asked of the commission to do, respectfully, is not the type of work the commission can do as a body of, while well knowledgeable individuals, not only those who are professionally do this work, but those who are impacted. But they're not a regulatory body, and they're not an organization or an institution, and they're not paid to make these very, very big decisions that I think the departments ought to be making at the suggestion of the commission, backed up with data. And so a lot of the amendments, Dr. Jacoby, to his credit, submitted were pretty good. Some of them just needed to be reworded and rewounded, I should say, recycled in some of the legislation, and some of the stuff. I think one particular section was removed because it's not within the commission's work to do. When we start talking about creating projects, that's not something the commission does unless somebody wants to suggest that that's something maybe a certain department within the state should be doing, but that is the type of work the commission does not do. So I was just respectfully trying to assist the vice chair regarding certain languages that was added to the bill. So
Mr.
Yeah,
Chair,
we
if I
should-
may.
Yeah, I just want to
Yeah,
mention
I
we
want
should.
to wrap it up. I thank the Delegate Boyce for the work she's done with the commission. And, you understand our greatest fear is big concepts and big hammers. And that's what we're concerned about. And we have a lot of common ground in the issues that this commission is doing, and I think we can do a lot to move forward.
No, I think you're right, Otto. I think you're right about the big stuff. I mean, but the reality is the big stuff is really what the departments really ought to be starting to think about. And so as these things come to the commission and they think about them and they're looking at data and they're looking at permits and they're looking at what other folks are doing and looking at how it impacts potentially community, it is our job to say, hey, Department of Environment, here's what has been found and discovered, and here's how you should be probably thinking about these things. And they really need to then also then do the work. These are issues that are not going away. These are issues that should probably be thought about in every agency, within every department. And so this is a body that is going to help them do those things and think on those things. And I would argue even too, of membership, environmental communities and environmental organizations on the membership also being able to take those things back to where they are and start incorporating them as well. So this is not a one body has to kind of make decisions and projects for everyone else. This is a body saying that, like, as collectively of this body, we've talked about these things, we've reviewed these things, and we're looking at maybe what other people are doing, and we're suggesting that these are the things as we analyze them that you should be doing and why it's important. So
thank you. I think you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and we should hopefully have the amendments that Delegate Boyce has been referring to and from the amendments office for our Wednesday meeting.
I did want to, if Mr. Chair, if you allow me to just point out one thing that I think is important. Really talked about not only coordinating with the Children's Environmental Health and Protection Advisory Council, that the commission should be coordinating with the Maryland Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities, and of course the Commission on Climate Change, which I think is important because all these things, of course, work together. It also, of course, added line 5, I believe, page 5, line 3, including for compliance with Title 6 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibiting, of course, discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in any way, in any program. And one thing I think, to Otto's point, is making sure certain words are defined, whether it's what does business organization mean? What does environmental organization mean? Also, there was so I think this is important. So the advocates mentioned that sometimes membership, which is one of the reasons why membership is expanded, that membership can be, you can only be one categorical member of a group. So I can't be somebody who is with an environmental organization as well as I may be living in an impacted community. You can't have kind of dual membership type roles. You have to be, just a legislator, or just someone from an affected community, or just someone from an environmental organization, so on and so forth. So I think that was an important thing to work out. And yeah, I think that's mainly it. I think once we get the actual amendments, it will spell out. But I think it certainly helps the commission do its due diligence, but it also allows the commission to help affect the change within the departments to incorporate this type of work, this type of thought processes in their own work. So I hope that was helpful, Mr. Chair.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I know we have some advocates here. Does anyone want to weigh in? Let's see, Ramon, Ariel, Monica, and then Tyler from MDE, if there's anything you would like to add. So is there anyone who would like to sort of weigh in on the bill as we discussed, as well as Delegate Boyce's summary of the amendments?
Yes, hi. My name is Monica Brooks, and I'm a resident of the Eastern Shore. And I'm definitely excited about this legislation on the Eastern Shore. Affected communities have not felt that we have been able to be heard. And so particularly the portion where it mentions having representatives from the affected communities is very valuable to us. So that when you're talking about the entire state of Maryland, the entire state, they have different things that affect them. You know, the rural community is different than the urban setting. And so having that opportunity to be heard is extremely important, as well as ensuring that we have are able to get, how should I say, validation, and I guess a little bit more credibility when we speak, because we've had, when people have spoken out in previous, and I understand what Delegate Boyce is saying about what the commission does versus what people think it does, but it will still go a long way to help communities who want to speak their voice, but have been attacked, who have been ridiculed, who have literally been fired from jobs just for speaking about health problems created in our environment, trying to protect our air and water. So these amendments, even with the changes that have been made, you know, particularly the Title VI is super important, and I hope that that portion is allowed to remain there. So I just am saying, I just am very supportive of this bill. I'm very supportive of the amendments. I know there's additions, you know, to the amendments, but for the community, for our community, particularly our people who are poultry workers, people who are immigrants working on the farms, as well as families who are surrounded by CAFOs, this will go a long way.
Okay, thank you. Any other feedback from any of the advocates or from Tyler?
Hi, I'd also like to add something. My name is Ariel King. I am a law clerk with the Chesapeake Legal Alliance this semester. And I just wanted to speak on specifically the public engagement portion that might not actually be added to the bill. While I understand that the commission's role isn't to create projects, I believe that actually meaningfully considering the feedback of community members is an important aspect of contributing to meaningful recommendations for different agencies. So while it may not be within the purview of the commission to specifically create specific projects, again, I just think that we need to think about ways to meaningfully engage community, ask for their input, get their feedback in order to create recommendations that will be implemented to actually affect change and create and move more towards environmental justice. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
This is Ramon. Since you brought me up, I just want to say we've been getting a lot of feedback on the commission. We're looking forward to having more input, more collaboration. Nothing bad to say about the efforts here. We do look forward to the continued collaboration.
Great, thank you.
This is Ramon Palencia from the Maryland Legal Conservation Voters. I want to reiterate Monica's and Ariel's comments, how important it is that community engagement piece. We completely understand about the limited capacity and responsibilities of the commission, but one thing is at the core, which is listening to communities, at least being informed and listening to those communities that are affected. And I believe including a plan to follow through with that is very important, meeting at a time and place, the ways that they can be engaged, the time frame where they can provide comments and feedback. I think that creating that plan at a minimum with some minimum specifications is very important, so communities and community members that are affected by environmental injustices have that know about that plan and have that opportunity to more meaningfully engage. And I definitely, and thank you so much for all the work on this on this important bill.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I don't mean to cut people off, but this isn't the typical posture that we do our subcommittee meetings.
You mean
If
where we
the-
have,
Where if the members of the subcommittee have questions and have asked of the people in the public that are taking part, they do. You know, giving them open forum is not the decor that we've used in the past.
well, that's true,
Enjoying
Delegate.
what I've heard, so.
Yeah, Delegate, that is true. In this case, I was asked in advance if the advocates would have an opportunity to comment. So that's why I recognize.
Well, I wasn't aware of that, and if you want
Yeah.
to them individually, I think it would be appropriate, but I don't think giving them an open forum of when they want to is where we want to go, but that's your decision. You're the chairman.
Yeah, no, Delegate. I mean, so the rule that we've used in the subcommittee is if a subcommittee member wants to call on an advocate to provide feedback or comments, then we'll allow that. Otherwise, we don't, give sort of an open mic to advocates to speak. So, but again, in this case, I was informed in advance that these individuals would like to make some remarks. So that's why I gave them a few minutes.
Mr. Chair, can I ask
Yes.
a quick question, a follow-up question? So I hear, I think Monica, Ms. Brooks started with it, and then it was, looks like she may have left. Ariel, and then talked about engagement. And I guess, again, like I said, because I'm in session, I've actually only been to one meeting, but I've read a host of emails since. I guess I'm trying to understand, when you say public engagement, do you mean, in other words, you don't want to just be able to hear it, you would like to have comment? Because I'm hearing I guess I'm not sure I understand. Your voice is important, and if you're on the commission, especially as someone from an affected community, you're there to provide not only your experiences, of course, your insight on things that people otherwise don't know because they're not there. And so that is the advantage of the person on the committee. But I guess when we're talking about engagement, is it that folks who are watching or participating in the meeting, there isn't like a public comment portion? I'm trying to understand a little better.
Yeah, I'll just say, Delegate Boyce, from my understanding, it's exactly what you mentioned. Having representation from certain communities place the commission in a position to hear what's happening and to know what's going on, boots on the ground in that region. So that in my personal experience in the past, when I've come even to Annapolis many times just to say, hey, this is what's going on the shore, it's not a lot of people, they're just kind of, I don't get it. What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. So having this ability to be able to translate that into the commission. So when there's a comprehensive view, then all the parts are equally included.
So like if we're talking about poultry litter, for instance, and you speak, what I think I'm hearing you saying is that it would be nice to potentially have a couple of people from that community just outside of the member on the commission to just provide some insight and comment.
That would be amazing to do. And I will say strategically, I mean, I don't want the commission to feel that it's going to be flooded with bombardment of people. But I do believe that on certain issues, especially those that are very heartfelt even controversial,
Sure.
it's really important to get a real understanding, a real valid background of it from the affected ones,
Absolutely.
not just the ones who are in positions of power. And that's the experience. And when I say that, I mean industry. Industry in some ways seems to get lots of voice,
Mhm.
where people, regular folk, perhaps not.
Sure.
And
That's fair.
so that's the point of it. So that there's a real clear understanding from all parties. Because I wouldn't expect, even before I moved to this rural community, being, I wouldn't have expected to understand all of this, what's going on there either. And then balancing that between, okay, well, in the urban areas, you're talking about smokestacks and you're trying to keep it all together.
Got
If you
it.
have those different pieces, then we can all come
Got
together.
it. Makes sense.
And I just wanted to add that on the commission right now, there are no representatives from communities impacted by environmental injustice. And
Mhm.
so another reason why we're proposing to have a community engagement strategy is to ensure that those voices are heard, regardless of whether there are actual members from environmental justice communities actually on the commission at the time. We want to make sure that these communities are still heard and validated and considered in all decision making and in the implementation of recommendations for government.
I certainly agree with that. I just think there's so many things that can be done automatically. I think like a switch, they don't necessarily need to be legislated. I think it's the will of the commission. They should just, I mean, I'm not the chair. I'm not going to speak for the chair. I just think those are things that can be done per se. I don't think they have to be legislated. I think that doesn't seem, access is not hard. I guess is just what I'm saying. Access is not a hard thing. It's just opening the door. And so, the question is how have they opened the door to certain individuals or certain communities to participate? I think that's the answer. I don't know, but that's certainly the question I'm asking.
And to add to that, from the few committee meetings that I've sat in on and the minutes that I've read, there's been a clear interest of the committee to increase community engagement, but no real plan in order to do so, in order to receive feedback from community members. So that was another reason why it was added to the proposed amendment language.
Got it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the good discussion about this and about House Bill 1207. And again, when we get the amendments on Wednesday, we'll go over those. So let's switch to House Bill 583, final afternoon of review of this bill, my climate bill, in particular to focus on the building sections. And if you have the summary that was handed out, this starts on page 2 under energy efficiency and clean energy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of summarize what's in the summary. I'm going to ask Chris Parts, who's an architect with AIA, if he wants to add anything. And then I know Tom Ballantyne with NAIOP would like to offer some feedback as well. So the first section applies to new buildings, new private sector buildings. This section applies to new construction of commercial and residential buildings with a floor area of 25,000 square feet or more, excluding the parking garage. And so what we say here is the Department of Labor on or before July 1st, 2022 will adopt regulations establishing energy conservation requirements for buildings that are covered by the bill that result in energy use reductions above the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code. Which is a code which the state adopts every time there is a version that comes out. And so the standards are the energy use reductions over the code are as indicated, starting at 30% for buildings built in 2024, going up to 2033, buildings would achieve net zero energy balance by then. And also by mid-year next year, the Department of Labor would adopt regulations requiring certain covered buildings to be solar ready as indicated there. So let me ask Chris Parts. I think you're here. I think,
am, yes.
or if you could, if there's anything you wanted to add to that sort of quick summary of what the energy conservation provisions for new buildings, what those provisions do.
Certainly. And essentially, the energy codes are updated every 3 years. And so essentially what we're looking at is this would be tracking with updated cycles, but and it's effectively tracking kind of one cycle ahead of adoption. So we're trying to just push a little bit further. It's the direction that everything is headed, but trying to get Maryland to push a little bit further, so it's adopted a little bit earlier and get us to a lower carbon footprint here for the statewide buildings. This is tracking behind what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. And it's tracking similar to what we're seeing in many jurisdictions, particularly in Northern Virginia as well. So we think that it's something that that most folks are accustomed to, and I think headed in a direction where we'd like to see Maryland head.
Okay, so you're saying that these energy reduction goals above the 2018 IEC International Energy Conservation Code, you're saying these are sort of one step ahead of what will be the most recent iteration of the IECC at the time?
Correct, right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, Tom, I know you would like to weigh in, so why don't you give us your feedback?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the opportunity to just provide some perspective from the commercial building owners and developers' point of view. And I think our approach to all the pieces, the building related pieces in this bill, is influenced by the state's greenhouse gas reduction strategy and the framework for that, which focuses on carbon reduction first. Energy efficiency is a piece of that, but it focuses on carbon reduction first. And the most efficient and the most sweeping way to reduce carbon emissions in buildings is greening the electric grid, which you've taken steps to do and will be incrementally increased over the course of this decade until you either get to 50 or 100% clean and renewable energy on the electric grid. These provisions here are decoupling Maryland from the building code and accelerating the rate of reduction in energy use in new buildings generically, whether it's carbon-based energy or clean and renewable green energy. That's spending resources and time and energy on things that don't exactly line up with where the greenhouse gas reduction strategies have been oriented in the past. Maryland's one of the only 3 states in the country that adopt the most recent energy code within the first year right away. And we'll continue to do that because it's state law and it has to be done without weakening amendments. So there's a glide path down for new buildings that's fairly steep based on historical improvements to the code. And will get steeper because there's a concentrated effort to do that. The difference is it'll be done within the building code framework. That's it's a consensus process that is vetted and cost effective versus in here we would be developing a Maryland specific kind of approach, which can be difficult. One note on net zero buildings, and I feel like I'm going on a little bit longer than I should, but
no, that's fine.
The net zero building, depending on what definition you choose, for the big buildings that our members build, there really isn't a realistic opportunity for net zero buildings until there is plentiful off-site green energy that can be accessed almost immediately. And that's going to take some development of the market and the utility grid structure to do that. When one of our members looked at this and said, look, if it's a single story bank building in Florida, it's easy to be net zero. There's very little energy draw. There's a lot of roof space, put solar panels on. There's a fantastic net zero building in Maryland, United Therapeutics building, that it's a marvel of construction technique and engineering, but it has trade-offs. It's got 1 person per 1,000 square feet populating the building, so it has a lower occupancy rate. They moved all the servers, the computer servers off-site. They have limitations on uses on their ground floor retail. And those are things that people look at and think, how are we going to concentrate growth into employment centers? If that's the limit of the sort of the net zero technology that we have now, aren't there better ways to do this? So that on that section, I guess I just stop there. I'm sure there are potential questions.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Chris, any quick, I don't mean this to be like a point counterpoint, but
Right.
any quick reply you want to do, and then we'll ask.
Well, I would point out that we have a number of schools in Maryland that are net zero projects. So it's not, schools are not 1 occupant per 1,000 square feet. And most buildings that are 4 stories or less are readily achievable as a net zero building. And I think that, I think to Tom's point, he's correct in enabling, community solar programs and rooftop solar programs that are looking more broadly, I think are a means to achieve that. But I think, taking a look and at the projects that are net zero are certainly more broad than single use, very specific buildings there.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from subcommittee members? Delegate Boyce, is your hand up for this? No? Okay. Let's see if I'm missing anyone's questions. All right, well, let's move on to the next section, which deals with retrofits for existing buildings. And this section would apply to buildings with a floor area of 25,000 square feet of more, excluding the parking garage area. If a covered building, and so this is the key part, if a covered building is undergoing a major renovation as defined in the bill, the building must be renovated to achieve a 40% reduction in the building's average annual energy use, or a level of efficiency that is 20% higher than would be required for a new building. A local jurisdiction could waive the requirement if sort of the return on investment isn't, if the investment isn't recouped over 15 years. So Chris, can I ask you to amplify on this section and any key parts I missed?
No, and I think it's primarily just providing 2 different options for building owners to take a look at how to improve efficiency on their building. And that's what I think this is doing, is providing 2 optional paths. One of the challenges sometimes you have is, when you're working with an existing system, you might have a highly efficient system and not be able to make that 40% reduction. So I think, looking and identifying an alternate path there to be able to pursue that.
Okay. Tom, any feedback?
Sure. If you don't mind, to the point that Chris made a moment ago about elementary schools, they're a relatively good candidate for net zero construction. And there are 2 in the city. I've been through the tour, as Chris must have too. They're 2-story buildings, but the difference with those schools is that their utilization rate is much lower than other types of buildings. The state's utilization rate is assumes they're vacant almost half the year. And there are differences there. And this does come down to building type. The net zero requirement here applies to big buildings, and specifically to big buildings, not to smaller buildings. And when you get to the 1, 2, 3-story type building, you have a better chance of generating enough energy on site. The the energy efficiency approach is one that, commercial real estate really believes in energy efficiency because it reduces operating costs and it increases the value of building. And there's a built-in incentive to capture energy efficiencies, especially in the business models that our members follow, which is to build and hold the buildings over time. They're usually full service kinds of buildings, but achieving 40% every time, it's difficult to mandate that as a target. There are variables from the orientation of the building to the sun, kind of directed by where the street layout is, to what kind of internal uses are, and whether the almost 50% swing in some energy use can be attributed to the types of tenants in a building and their energy use patterns. So there's a kind of a bluntness to this that really we didn't think was nuanced enough. And again, we're avoiding the use of green and renewable energy here, when the target really needs to be looking at the on-site combustion of fossil fuels and what can be done to reduce those through energy efficiency, or switch them entirely by rotating the equipment out over time. That fits with the climate strategy.
Okay. Chris, any further commentary?
And I guess what I would just say is that, one of the things that we're, what I think this bill is focused on is, one thing we do know is that buildings consume 30 to 40% of energy used for energy consumption on the grid. And if we're focused on just greening the grid, we're still consuming 30 to 40% of that energy. If we're making our buildings more efficient and enabling them to use less energy, then you're going to be demanding less energy. And if you green the grid, you're even better off. So I think part of it is really focusing on reducing demand. And again, I think as we're looking at with the existing buildings, this is, again, probably behind what we're seeing happening in Washington, D.C. and some of the Northern Virginia jurisdictions. And it's, where we need to be headed with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any subcommittee questions, subcommittee member questions? Delegate Otto? Delegate Otto, do you have
I
a?
was muted. I'm sorry. You couldn't hear me.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
I had concerns about some things or questions about it. You're talking about retrofitting buildings. When does these goals kick in? And I heard 50 to 60% reductions, other things. Is this a optional requirement that somebody or a jurisdiction could undertake to reduce these things? Or at some point in time, if we want to renovate or repair a roof on a school building that might be 40 years old, are we going to have to go through a whole syringe of things? I mean, I don't see it in the summary, but it might be in the bill somewhere, and I don't know what amendments have been added at that time.
Yeah, Chris, can you address the issue? I mean,
Sure. And this, so essentially the threshold for this for existing buildings is 25,000 square feet. So, you might have an average household of, your average home might be 2,500 to 3,000 square feet.
You're talking about private homes?
No. Well, I'm just giving as a, we're looking at something that's about 10 times the size of a private home as the threshold that would be, the size of building that you would begin with. So 25,000 square feet is the size threshold of a building that would fall under this requirement. and it's only when you're making a major renovation. So if you're replacing a roof, you certainly wouldn't be required to do that. But if you're completely renovating a building, modifying heating and cooling systems, doing window replacement and roof replacement and all that as a full package, typically your threshold would be about 50% of the value of the building. As a major renovation is what that typical threshold would be for a major upgrade. And
that's typical for a flood.
It could be, right?
Insurance
Yep.
requirements. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting more complicated all the time.
But that, again, that's the opportunity. If you have a major impact like that, you can make your building much more efficient. When you are making those upgrades there.
Delegate Stein, could I add some more?
Sure.
To your question, I also just want to say that this is an optional requirement unless it's going to save you money. The bill says if you are not going to get money back, make the money back in 15 years, then you don't have to do this. And I think that's a really important requirement. And it also says if your building's already very energy efficient, then you don't have to achieve the same level of energy efficiency reductions as a building that starts out less efficient. So there's, this is only going to be a requirement if you have a very, very big building, commercial, or very, very big multifamily residential building, only if you're spending more than 50% of the appraised value on the renovation, only if it's very inefficient to begin, does it have to achieve those 40% energy reduction requirements. So there's a lot to accommodate needs here.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Tom?
Just keep in mind that when you hit a 50% threshold, this energy reduction requirement would not be the only new obligation to build into the project. There's all kinds of other code normaling requirements that large renovations have to take on that relate to fire protection and access, and in addition to the energy pieces here. Our members are on the transition committees in the District of Columbia. They own a lot of buildings there. It's our market leader. They're going to teach us a lot about how this works, what doesn't work, how it can be done cost effectively. They're in the trial period. They've got a big milestone in 2025 where they have to really bring down energy use in buildings, and that's it's a concern for some building owners because the economics of their buildings just aren't going to improve very much with the cost side of the renovation. We're going to have to figure out where it works and where it doesn't. For me, it's a situation where you go in steps. DC, Montgomery County is taking a very aggressive approach, and then this summer, the Climate Commission has hired their climate consulting firm to look at least cost pathways to decarbonizing the building industry. That's going to be focused on carbon, not only on kilowatts. And that's a group that advised the California Air Resources Board and has worked in Oregon and Washington and Minnesota and New York, and has a track record of figuring these things out.
Okay, thanks. By the way, it's a couple minutes before 5. I would like to get through the rest of the building section, which hopefully will take us to just about maybe 5 or 7 minutes after 5. But if folks have to drop off, no problem. I do want to say we'll be meeting again Wednesday at 12:30. So just FYI for your calendars. Okay, the next section is energy modeling. Requires the Department of Labor to adopt regulations directing local jurisdictions to require energy life cycle cost estimates for all new buildings. The modeling would require valuation of life cycle costs for a new building for an all-electric option and then a mixed fuel option. The idea here is that, more in a number of cases, maybe a building developer building or someone who's building a new building may not consider all electric as an option. So these regulations require energy modeling using those two options, all electric and mixed fuel. Chris and Tom, any comments on that?
Just, from practice, essentially, if you're not modeling and measuring, you're really not able to tell what your performance is on the building. The modeling really enables you to compare. If you're taking a look at different renewable energy sources and such, it enables you to compare what's going to be the most efficient for the building owners and what will be the most cost effective long term. So I think, and essentially to Tom's point, if we're really focused on, carbon reduction, taking a look at an all electric option versus a mixed fuel option enables us to identify the cost of eliminating carbon if we've got renewable sources for the all electric option there.
Yeah, Tom, any feedback?
Sure, thanks. There is a lot of energy modeling that goes into building design. The matter of fact, the state of Maryland does something similar to this, but there are differences that when the energy engineers looked at this from, that are part of our group, they said we need consistency in how the modeling is done, or we need the option to be able to pick, off the shelf kind of modeling tools that we're using today. This has a dimension to it that requires the foreseeable future costs of combustion, including costs resulting from stranded fossil fuel assets and carbon pricing. So that's a dimension that our energy modelers can't really define or quantify for us. And the impetus for this has been presented as it's an education standpoint, right? It's an educational tool. It's a really complicated educational tool. If the equipment is more efficient and has better economic and social value, then there probably is a better way to do it than to run a specific kind of energy modeling that may or may not be, kind of what the building design team is going to be using.
Okay. All right, thanks. The last section is what deals with public sector buildings. There in code is already a high performance building requirements for new state or capital projects that are 100% funded with state dollars. This would extend those to capital projects funded with 25% of state funding. And the high performance building requirement must include compliance with LEED Net Zero or equivalent standards established by the Maryland Green Building Council. And separately for schools, there is a provision that says in each school system, looking at the period of 2022 through 2030, at least one school must be constructed to meet net zero energy requirements. And then there is funding that's provided by the bill to provide school districts the sort of differential cost between a high performance building and a net zero building. So Chris, anything you want to add to that?
I think what we're looking to do basically is to capture what we found a number of loopholes where jurisdictions have been opting not to do this. So I think that, one thing we know about schools is they're often 50 or 100-year buildings. And if we're not making them efficient from the beginning, it's an operational cost that the jurisdictions are carrying. So I think trying to make sure that we're capturing as much of that upfront as possible, and then essentially the solar ready or net zero projects is currently in the state guidelines, we're required to plan for or to identify solar capacity at what's called a design development level. But more often than not, it simply is eliminated from the project because it's considered to be too expensive. As I think we talked about earlier, schools are a prime candidate for zero energy buildings, and particularly with this Net Zero School Loan Fund, this enables schools to really significantly reduce operating costs over the life of the building, and it's a great opportunity for school jurisdictions.
Okay, Tom, I realize this is public buildings, not private sector. Didn't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
I think, our general thinking is that this transition is going to be really disruptive. I mean, there are 1,200,000 buildings out there that have gas heat. They're old, many of them. It's a disruptive challenge. And especially the new technologies, as part of this adopting new technologies, we think the state should play a leadership role and step forward and really take a trial, sort of a trial run at these. Lead Net Zero is not a trial run, but it is, I think, important to point out that it requires offsetting the source energy, not just the site energy. That means that the energy offset has to include the energy that's lost during generation and transmission, which is about 3 times what almost 2 to 3 times what the site energy is. So it's a more expensive approach, and it's a more expansive in terms of the mandate. One of the good things that I think you're going to get in the Senate bill is that it corrects a kind of a bureaucratic loophole. Maybe Chris was thinking of this when he used that word, that several years ago, the state was allowed to call, LEED buildings green without certifying them. And they're also tied to an older building and energy code than what's used in the private market. And that I think what the Senate bill does is bring that up to current standard.
Okay. Delegate Otto, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This brings up a couple of questions for me. If this is public buildings we're talking about, what were we talking about when we were talking about the 2,500 square foot requirements earlier in the bill? Were they not public buildings?
These are
sector buildings?
These are, yeah, the 20, you're right. There's for the private.
I mean, you told me there were public buildings in, and it made me wonder. I mean, I don't see too many 2,500
or 20, yeah,
anymore.
or 25,000.
I went to school in one when I was in elementary school.
Right. Chris or Tom, I really should know this off the top of my head, but to the high performance building requirements for the public sector for state buildings, is there a minimum size requirement?
I think that under the state requirements, I believe it's a 10,000 square foot threshold under the state requirements. The 25,000 that we were referencing was for private
private sector
renovation.
Yeah, you were saying 2,500, not 25,000.
It was. I'm sorry if I misspoke, but it's 25,000 for the private buildings, and I think
it's 2,500 you said earlier, and I was
Okay.
assuming it was.
Sorry about that.
Public buildings, and I had real issues with that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And secondly, we were talking here about the energy use in the public sectors. Dana, you mentioned in the thing that it required one zero energy use building. Now, is that for the state, or is that for each jurisdiction?
Each school system was to have one school that meets net zero energy requirements.
Well, we're not going to build a new school probably in 50 years, much less pay for that.
Okay, well, if
school system,
then you'd be exempt.
We're going to be closing buildings, not open. Do we get credit for closing buildings?
That could be a separate bill, Delegate Otto, but not. But you're not
well,
going to be
this
building.
looks pretty complicated, and what we're dealing with here, maybe we can make another amendment.
Well, amendments, we'll be considering amendments.
All right, fair enough.
Okay. Any other questions from any subcommittee members? Okay. Well, that wraps up the discussion about buildings and overall about the climate bill. Thanks for everyone's patience, in particular to Tom and Chris for the review of the building sections today. So we are done with subcommittee. Any comments for the good of the subcommittee before we wrap up? Delegate Boyce?
I hate to bring this up.
That's okay.
Whether it's you and I or the subcommittee, can we talk about trees again at some point?
Sure.
I just want to make sure we get trees right. And at this point, we've got two bills, your bill, another bill. And from what I understand, another bill that maybe has already passed that may address some street stuff. So I'm just want to make sure we have the best trees going forward. I don't
Okay.
know.
No, that's fine. Well, let me ask you in the subcommittee this. We could, I think I saw Robin Clark from CBF sort of prime impetus behind the tree section. We could schedule a call with her that for you and any other subcommittee members who are interested. Would that work?
Well, I met with her on Friday. I met with DNR. It just so happened today. So
Okay.
There's something missing, and
Okay.
and maybe it's all of them. I mean,
Well, how about this, Delegate Boyce? Well, I'll follow up with you and we'll talk about your question. And
yes. Mm-hmm.
yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Any other comment or question? All right. Well, very good. Sorry, we went a little bit late today, 5:11. But again, with daylight savings time, we got plenty of light outside. So, we're not ending that late. So thank you. All right, everyone, have a good evening and see you soon.